Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are setting the time circuits for the very near future.
Right. We are heading to mid-February 2026.
Exactly. We are standing right on the floor of the Sri Lankan parliament. And if you think parliamentary records are just dusty stacks of paper filled with point of order and polite clapping, you are in for a serious surprise today.
Oh, yeah. It is definitely not a quiet week in the chamber. The atmosphere is electric. It is actually bordering on hostile in some of these sessions. We are looking at a document that captures a very specific slice of history.
The opposition bulletin.
Right. Specifically, the one covering the week of February 17th to the 20th, 2026.
And just to orient everyone, because you know context is everything here, when we say opposition bulletin, we are looking at the world purely through the eyes of the 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗧𝗦𝗧𝗦𝗧𝗦𝗧𝗦𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧 Parliamentary
This is essentially their report card on the ruling government, which at this point in early 2026 is the NPP and JVP.
Right, and the mission of this deep dive isn't to say Team A is right or Team B is wrong. That is not what we do here.
Yeah.
Our job is to unpack the arguments the opposition is making in this specific bulletin. And, I mean, they are not pulling any punches.
Not at all. They have essentially built a case that the government is prioritizing theatrics. You know, looking good on camera over actual competence in running the country.
Yeah, we've got three main acts in this drama to get through. Act 1 is a massive fight over money, specifically MP pensions, which turns into a huge accusation about a secret party fund. Act 2 is about energy, why the lights might be flickering and why gas queues are back.
And Act 3 is all about the law. You've got pirates, drug lords, and a big fight over who controls the internet.
It is money, power, and digital rights. Really a perfect storm. So let's start with the money. The government decides to repeal the Parliamentary Pensions Law, number 1 of 1977.
Right.
And on the surface, this sounds like the ultimate crowd pleaser. We are cutting politicians' perks. I mean, who doesn't love hearing that?
Exactly. It is the ultimate populist move. The government's argument is very straightforward here. Austerity. They are saying to the public that the country's in a tight spot, so why should MPs get a pension for life after just 5 years of service?
Which resonates with a lot of people.
Absolutely. They argue that being an MP is a public service, not a lifelong career. And crucially, the Supreme Court ruled they only needed a simple majority to get this done, so they were full steam ahead with the repeal.
But the opposition, they didn't just roll over on this. They came back with two main counter-arguments. One was philosophical, and one was just a massive accusation of hypocrisy. Let's start with the philosophy part. I was reading the comments from opposition leader 𝗙𝗢𝗪 and MP 𝗙𝗢𝗪𝗓𝗔𝗓𝗎𝗓, and they were heavily leaning on this idea of professionalism.
Right, the social protection argument. It sounds counterintuitive at first, but if you follow their logic, it makes sense. They argue that if you strip away financial security from the role of an MP, you completely change who can actually afford to be an MP.
Because if I'm a successful doctor,
Right,
or an engineer or a lawyer, and I decide I want to run for parliament, I am taking a huge personal risk.
exactly. You step away from your private career for 5, maybe 10 years. You lose your client base. You lose your seniority in your field. If you get voted out or you just retire and there is no pension, there's no safety net, you might actually be financially ruined for trying to serve your country.
So the opposition's basically saying if you take away the pension, the only people who will run for office are the super rich who just don't need the money anyway.
Or the corrupt few who plan to steal the money they need while they hold the seat. They argue the pension is essentially the price society pays to allow normal professional people to serve without destroying their own financial futures.
Okay, so that is the high-minded argument. But then they pivoted to the hypocrisy argument, and this is where the numbers get really wild. MP 𝗙𝗢𝗪𝗓 𝗙𝗢𝗪 dropped an absolute bombshell here.
Yeah, this is the big aha moment of the entire bulletin.
He claims that while the government is publicly shouting about cutting pensions to save the state money, they are quietly running a massive party fund behind the scenes.
The allegation is that the ruling MPs aren't actually keeping their salaries, they are transferring them directly to a centralized party fund.
I want to make sure I get these numbers right for everyone listening because the bulletin is highly specific. They claim the MP salary transfers total 55 million rupees a month.
Correct. But it actually gets much bigger than that. They allege that the allowances for local councillors, and we are talking about 4,700 people here, are also being funneled into this JVP party fund. The bulletin estimates that part alone at over 100 million rupees a month.
Okay, let's just pause and do the math on that. The opposition is saying the ruling party is collecting roughly 155 million rupees every single month into their own political war chest.
Yes. And now compare that to the cost of the pensions they are so dramatically cutting on the floor. The state spends about 34 million rupees a month on MP pensions.
Wow. So the argument is you are making this huge theatrical scene about saving the taxpayers 34 million while you are quietly consolidating 155 million a month for your own party machine.
Precisely. MP 𝗙𝗢𝗟𝗡𝗪 actually calls it malicious intent. The argument is that this isn't about saving the country money at all. It is about shifting power. If you take away the individual pension, the MP has absolutely no financial independence. They become completely dependent on the party machinery.
That same machine that holds the 155 million.
Exactly. It turns the representative of the people into an employee of the party. If they rebel against the party line, they starve.
That is a terrifying thought for a democracy.
Yeah.
And there was a moment where the opposition actually tried to compromise right. During the committee stage, MP 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗪 tried to bring in a grandfather clause.
He did, which is pretty standard in law. The idea is new rules for new people, but keep the old rules for the people already in the system.
Right.
He wanted to protect those who had already qualified for or were currently receiving their pension. But the government flatly rejected that amendment. And the opposition points to that rejection as proof that this was vindictive. They say it wasn't just about pure economics, it was about punishing past representatives.
Man. So that is the battle over the party fund. But while they were fighting over millions in the pension fund, the opposition claims the country was actually losing hundreds of millions in the energy sector. Let's move to segment 2, coal and gas.
This is where we move from political theory straight into hard economics. The bulletin highlights a motion regarding the 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗪 coal power plant brought by MP 𝗦𝗦𝗕𝗦𝗪.
And 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗪 is basically the backbone of the grid. If that plant sneezes, the whole country catches a cold. So what went wrong, according to the opposition?
They allege a highly corrupted procurement process for the 2025-2026 coal season. Specifically, they point to the tender period. Usually for an international coal tender, you give suppliers 42 days to submit a bid.
Which makes sense. You need time to check the technical specs, organize international shipping, get your financing ready.
Well, the opposition claims the government slashed that window down to just 21 days.
Why cut it exactly in half?
In the world of procurement, a drastically shortened tender period is a massive red flag. It usually suggests the game is rigged.
Yeah.
It implies you have a pre-selected supplier who already knows the deal, and you are just cutting the time so legitimate competitors physically cannot get their bids in fast enough.
And the supplier they ended up picking the bulletin was not very complimentary about them, to say the least.
No, not at all. They allege the selected company had zero prior experience in coal supply. And even more concerning, they claim the company had links to money laundering.
So you rush the process, you pick a shady supplier, and what is the actual result on the ground?
Substandard coal. And this isn't just about the coal being dirty. It has a direct physical impact on the national grid. The bulletin states that because of the poor quality of the coal power generation at the plant dropped from 810 megawatts down to 715 megawatts.
That is nearly a 100 megawatt drop. That is massive. That is like losing a whole medium-sized power plant overnight.
Exactly. That is a 12% drop in total capacity. And you can't just let the lights go out across the country, so you have to fill that gap somehow. And how do you do it? You burn diesel.
And diesel is way more expensive than coal.
Much more expensive. The bulletin estimates the direct loss from the bad coal deal at 150 million rupees. But the indirect cost of having to burn that expensive diesel to keep the lights on, it is astronomical. So circling back to the intro.
We cut 34 million in pensions to save money, but we literally burn 150 million on bad coal because of a shady tender.
That is the competence gap the opposition is highlighting. They are saying you are really good at the theater of austerity, but you are bad at the actual business of procurement.
And it wasn't just electricity either. The dreaded gas queues made a comeback in this bulletin.
Yes. MP 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗪𝗢𝗪 raised this issue. He pointed out that the government fired an experienced Omani supplier who had been reliable and brought in a brand new company.
And his description of this new company was hilarious in a very dark way. He said they have only 2 ships and absolutely no track record in Asia.
It paints a picture of extreme fragility for the listener. If you rely on a tiny company with 2 ships for an entire nation's cooking gas supply, one storm or one engine breakdown, and the entire supply chain snaps.
The government apparently claimed the cues were just staged by the media, though.
Which the opposition furiously denied. They argue that telling regular people standing in line for gas that they are just actors is a violation of their fundamental rights. It is dismissing a very real crisis as fake news.
Which is actually a perfect segue to our third segment, law and order. Because fake news and reality really seem to be blurring here too. The government introduced the Judicature Amendment Bill.
Right. This bill is technically about the high seas. It gives the high court jurisdiction to try crimes committed in international waters or on stateless vessels. Ideally, it is designed to stop drug trafficking before it ever reaches the shore.
Which sounds great on paper. But the opposition essentially says, what is the point of a shiny new law if you aren't even enforcing the old ones?
Right. MP 𝗦𝗦𝗕𝗙 used a really smart economic indicator to prove this point. He just looked at the street price of drugs.
Basic supply and demand.
Exactly. If the police are genuinely seizing tons of drugs at sea, the supply on the street should drop, and the price of ice or heroin should skyrocket. But Pereira points out that prices are completely stable and availability is very high.
Meaning the supply chain is completely unbroken despite all the grand press conferences showing off drug busts?
Correct. And then MP 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗕𝗦𝗧 dropped one of the most scandalous allegations in the entire bulletin regarding 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗧.
Oh, this is the lunch story. I read this and I had to double-check I wasn't reading a script for a crime movie.
It is very vivid. So 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗧 is a key entry point for smuggling. MP 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗧 alleged that when ruling party members visit 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗧, the local drug traffickers are actually the ones providing meals for them.
So the drug lords are literally catering lunch for the government MPs.
That is the specific allegation, yes. It implies a very cozy, symbiotic relationship between the criminals and the politicians. He also mentioned a specific police officer who was accused of trafficking. Instead of being prosecuted and fired, the officer was just transferred.
A classic transfer punishment. You're caught smuggling drugs. Just go work in the next town over.
It completely undermines the government's whole narrative of law and order. The opposition is arguing that passing a fancy bill about the high seas is totally useless if the police on the ground are having lunch with the traffickers.
They also mentioned the shooting of a lawyer in 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. The government just called it underworld activity.
And the opposition called it a total breakdown of national security. Their point is, when lawyers are getting shot in the street, the rule of law is failing. You can't just slap the label gang violence on it and shrug it off. It is a sign that the state has lost control.
Okay, let's shift gears to the final segment. We have covered the money, the energy, and the crime. Now we go digital. The Thursday dialogue or Guru Day?
This is where the debate gets a bit more intellectual, but the stakes for you and me are just as high. The opposition is calling for the full repeal of the Online Safety Act. They view it as a draconian law specifically designed to silence political dissent.
But they aren't just saying let the internet be the Wild West. They actually have a pretty detailed counterproposal.
They do. They call it context-specific governance. Instead of a blanket law that just scares everyone, they want targeted modern measures. One of the most interesting proposals they brought up was about age verification.
They want to keep kids under 16 off social media entirely right.
Yes. But here is the critical nuance. They do not want the government policing it. They want to work directly with the platforms, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, to implement those barriers.
But realistically, would those massive tech companies listen to Sri Lanka? We are a pretty small market globally.
Well, that is where the opposition's regional coalition idea comes in. They are proposing a Global South alliance. Basically, Sri Lanka teams up with India, Indonesia, and Nepal to negotiate together.
Strength in numbers.
Exactly. If you represent 1 billion users collectively, Mark Zuckerberg actually has to take your phone call. It is a much more sophisticated approach than just trying to ban a website locally.
They also talked about fighting disinformation.
Yes, but not by throwing people in jail. They want to establish rapid fact-checking mechanisms, and they want to run digital literacy programs directly on the platforms themselves. So when you are scrolling TikTok, you might actually see a module on how to spot fake news injected into your feed.
Meeting the user where they are, that makes a lot of sense. And they ended this section with a quick history lesson about criminal defamation.
A very important reminder, too. Criminal defamation was officially repealed in Sri Lanka in 2002. But the opposition notes that the police often act as if it still exists. They use the threat of it as intimidation to stop people from criticizing the government online. The opposition is demanding a stop to using these zombie laws to scare regular citizens.
So if we pull back the camera and look at this whole week, from the pension fight to the coal ships to the drug lords in Myanmar, what is the big picture here? What is the core story the opposition is trying to tell you?
The overarching narrative is one of misplaced priorities. They are painting a picture of a government that is completely obsessed with the performance of governance. Cutting pensions to look austere, passing maritime bills to look tough on crime, but failing at the actual act of governance.
Competence gap again?
Exactly. The core argument is you can easily cut a pension, but you apparently can't buy coal without losing 150 million rupees. You can pass a law for the ocean, but you can't stop the drug flow on land.
And for our listener, it really highlights the difference between passing a law and executing a strategy. It is super easy to vote yes in Parliament. It is incredibly hard to manage a complex supply chain.
And it leaves us with that really uncomfortable question about the pensions. If you save 34 million there, but you lose 150 million on a bad coal tender, have you actually saved the taxpayer anything? Or have you just rearranged the furniture while the house is actively on fire?
Yeah, I want to end today on a thought that really stuck with me from the source material. It was a point raised by MP 𝗙𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗧 during that initial pension debate. It is a deeply provocative question about the future of democracy itself.
It is a chilling thought, honestly. He basically asked if politicians are stripped of all financial independence. If they have no pension, no personal security, does the power simply shift from the individual elected representative to the wealthy party machine that is backing them?
Right. If the MP cannot afford to live without the party's help, who really controls their vote, is it the constituent who elected them, or is it the party fund that feeds them?
It suggests that by making politics too financially risky for the honest professional, we might inadvertently create a parliament that is owned lock, stock, and barrel by the highest bidder.
A very heavy thought to chew on. And that brings us to the end of this deep dive into the Opposition Bulletin of February 2026. We have unpacked the pensions, the power plants, and the politics.
It is always way more complex than the headlines suggest.
Always. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.